All right, so welcome to your deep dive. This one takes us into some ancient Hindu scripture. We're going to be looking at the Vishnu Purana
Oh, cool.
and specifically an excerpt from a dialogue. This comes from Vishnu Purana 15.mp3, and it features a king who's a little confused. He's seeking some wisdom,
Yeah.
and he goes to a sage who basically turns his world upside down.
I love these king and sage dialogues.
Yeah.
Like they tend to be these really dynamic exchanges. And this one in particular, I think, what makes it so fascinating is that the king's dilemma is like so relatable, even for us today. Imagine having all the wealth and power and luxury you could ever want,
Right.
but still feeling, like deeply unfulfilled.
Right.
And that's where we find King Savira in this text.
Like he's at this existential crossroads, right? He thinks he has it all, but something's missing.
Exactly. And that's where this sage comes in. The text doesn't actually give the sage a name.
Okay.
His teachings they're anything but ordinary. He doesn't offer the king platitudes or easy solutions. He throws out these really radical statements and they really challenge every assumption the king has about happiness and the meaning of life.
It's almost like a philosophical sledgehammer, like just shattering his carefully constructed worldview.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. So he starts off by systematically dismantling the things that people typically cling to, right? Wealth, family, even religious rituals.
Yeah.
And he argues that none of these things can be the ultimate source of happiness or the true self, which in Hindu philosophy is referred to as the Atman.
The Atman, yeah. Maybe we should pause there for a second, unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
Some of our listeners might not be familiar with that term.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So Atman, it's often translated as soul or spirit, but it's a little more nuanced than that. It refers to the true self, the essence of who we are, beyond our physical bodies, beyond these ever-changing experiences.
So it's not just about like who you are in this lifetime. It's about something much, much deeper.
Exactly. It's the unchanging, eternal part of us. It exists, beyond the limitations of time and space.
Oh, okay. So how does the sage convince the king that all this stuff, like the wealth, the power, all that's not the path to true happiness and certainly not the Atman?
Well, he uses some pretty clever logic. So, for example, he asks the king, if wealth were truly the ultimate good, why would people give it away in charity? Why would they spend it on fleeting pleasures?
Right.
It's like the very fact that we seek something more than wealth.
Yeah.
That indicates that it can't be the ultimate source of fulfillment.
It's like if you're so attached to something, why are you always trying to get rid of it, at least, temporarily?
Right, yeah. And he applies a similar line of reasoning to family and relationships. He says, how can your son be your true self when he's also someone else's son?
Okay.
Right. And that really challenges this idea of possessive love, this notion that our happiness somehow depends on these external relationships.
So he's pushing the king to look beyond, all these kind of surface level attachments. But if not those things, what is the true self? What is the Atman?
Well, the sage, he describes the Atman as one all-pervading, unchanging. It's pure consciousness, and he really emphasizes that it's beyond any material qualities, right? Like it's unborn, it's beyond growth and decay.
Yeah.
It's omnipresent, it's imperishable.
So we're talking about a universal consciousness here. It's not just down to my body or my mind.
Exactly. And because this Atman is the same in all beings, there's really no true separation between us.
Oh, goodness.
Right? This sense of duality that we have, the me versus you.
Yeah.
That's an illusion.
That's a pretty radical concept.
Yeah.
It goes against how we normally experience the world, right?
Yeah.
So how does he explain that? How does the sage explain that?
He gives this brilliant analogy. So he talks about how, the air is one, right? But when it passes through different holes in a flute, it produces different notes.
Okay.
So just like the air seems to change based on the flute, our true self appears different because we're experiencing it through our individual bodies and minds.
But just like the air is still air no matter what note it produces,
Yeah.
our essence is still the same, that same universal Atman.
Exactly, exactly. The underlying reality is oneness.
Okay.
Right? A connection that goes beyond our individual perceptions.
That's pretty mind-blowing. So I have a feeling he's not done yet, though. I have a feeling the sage is going to give the king something
All right.
a little more concrete to illustrate all of this.
You know, he's about to launch into a story within a story, which is such a classic teaching technique. You know, you see this throughout Hindu scriptures. And he uses this story to really drive home this concept of non-duality and what it actually means to live with that understanding.
And the story is about?
It's the tale of Ribhu,
Okay.
who's the son of Brahma, and his student Nidaga.
Okay.
And Ribhu seems to, inherently get this whole concept of the true self.
Right.
Whereas Nidaga, even though he's, well versed in the scriptures, he really struggles to grasp this idea of non-duality, like beyond just intellectual understanding.
So it's the difference between like head knowledge and the actual like lived experience, embodied experience.
Exactly. And their first encounter, after 1,000 years, it really illustrates this. So Nidaga, he's so excited to see his teacher again. He prepares all this delicious food for Ribhu.
Okay.
But Ribhu refuses it. He calls it all just like skin and bones.
Oh, wow. Really? That seems kind of rude, right?
Well, on the surface, yeah. But what Ribhu's actually doing is he's using this as a really powerful teaching moment.
Right.
He's pointing out the illusory nature of desire and how our attachment to these sensory pleasures like taste, they ultimately lead to suffering.
So he's saying like, yeah, the food might seem appealing, but it's just a temporary distraction from the real truth.
Exactly. And then he doesn't stop there. He goes on to ask Nidaga, he says, where do you live?
Like, where do you live?
Yeah, like it seems like such a simple question, right?
Yeah.
But it's designed to really challenge Nidaga's his limited perception of himself.
Right, because he's still caught up in the physical world, so he's probably thinking, well, in this house or in this village or something like that.
Exactly. And that highlights how often we confine ourselves to these small, limited identities.
Yeah.
We forget the boundless nature of our true being.
Right. So he's trying to shake him out of that limited perspective.
Yeah. Make him realize that the true self isn't confined to a particular location or physical form.
Right. Okay, and so this is just the beginning.
This is just the beginning
of their interactions.
Yeah.
And it just gets more and more interesting from here. So we're gonna pick this up in part 2 of our deep dive.
Yeah, it's a good cliffhanger.
But before we go, I just wanted to throw out a question for our listener to think about.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground here, some pretty profound stuff. But how does all this talk of non-duality, how does that relate to us, living in the modern world?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because it's easy to think of this as just some abstract concept from these ancient scriptures. But the truth is these ideas, they have really practical implications for how we live our lives,
right.
How we interact with others, how we find true fulfillment. So as we continue to explore this story, think about how these teachings might resonate with your own experiences. What would it mean to see the world through this lens of unity?
Yeah, something to ponder for sure.
Right. Yeah.
All right, we'll see you in part 2.
Looking forward to it.
All right, so welcome back to our deep dive into the Vishnu Purana. It's like we're on this philosophical treasure hunt. And we're uncovering all these really cool insights about the true self and the nature of reality.
And what I love about this particular text is that it's not just, abstract concepts, right?
Right.
It's giving us this really engaging story to kind of see how these ideas actually play out in a practical way.
Yeah. So last time we left off with Ribhu rejecting Nidaga's this lavish food offering,
right,
and asking that really, really thought-provoking question, where do you live?
Yeah.
So what happens next in their little philosophical sparring match?
Well, so Ribhu, he disappears for another 1,000 years.
Oh, wow.
Talk about, taking the long view.
Yeah.
But when he finally returns, he finds Nidaga observing a king's procession.
Okay.
And this is where Ribhu really puts Nidaga's understanding to the test.
Okay, so I'm picturing this like grand parade with elephants and musicians and all this pomp and circumstance.
Yeah.
What does Ribhu do?
So he starts by asking Nidaga to point out the king in the crowd.
Okay.
And Nidaga, of course, he easily identifies the king. He's the one riding on the majestic elephant and all that.
Right, yeah.
But then Ribhu asks Nidaga to explain the distinction between the king and the elephant.
Oh, okay.
Right. He's pushing him to go beyond just visually identifying them, right?
Yeah.
And really articulate what makes them different.
So he's saying, okay, you can see them, but do you really understand like the nature of their existence?
Exactly. And remember, this is all about highlighting the illusion of separateness, right?
Yeah.
Ribhu wants Nidaga to see that even seemingly distinct entities like a king and an elephant, they're actually interconnected on this deeper level.
Okay.
Right.
So how does Nidaga respond? Does he like launch into some philosophical treatise on like the nature of kingship and elephanthood?
Well, not exactly. Ribhu throws another curveball at him.
Okay.
He says, what is above and what is below?
Huh. Okay. I mean,
it's like a simple question, right?
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward.
It is on the surface, but think about it. Like the concepts of above and below, they depend entirely on your perspective.
Oh, okay.
Right? Like if you're standing on your head, what was above is now below.
Oh, right.
So Ribhu's he's using this question to expose how our perceptions really shape our understanding of reality.
Okay.
What we consider separate or different, it really depends on our limited viewpoint.
Yeah, okay, I'm following you.
So, and here's where the story takes this hilarious turn.
Okay.
Nidaga, in an attempt to answer Ribhu's question,
Yeah.
He climbs on top of him.
He climbs on top of Ribhu, like to demonstrate.
Yeah, to demonstrate above and below.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's pretty funny.
Right. It's such a human moment, Like even though Nidaga, he's studied all these scriptures, he knows the concept of non-duality intellectually.
Yeah.
He's still so attached to these physical distinctions
Right.
that he literally climbs on top of his teacher to prove a point.
Yeah, it's like he's saying like, see, I'm above you now,
Exactly. But in that very act, he's actually reinforcing the idea of separateness that Ribhu's trying to dismantle.
Right.
But here's the beautiful thing. This seemingly silly act, it becomes a catalyst for a breakthrough.
Okay.
In that moment of climbing on Ribhu, Nidaga suddenly recognizes his teacher. It's like all the pieces finally click into place for him.
Yeah, he goes from like trying to intellectually understand this concept,
right,
to actually having this direct experience of it.
Yeah. And Ribhu, he recognizes this shift in Nidaga.
Okay.
And he offers this final teaching. He says, "See the self in everyone."
Okay.
It's such a simple statement, but it really encapsulates the essence of non-duality.
Right.
It's like he's saying, like, don't just think about this idea, like live it. See the interconnectedness in every interaction, in every being you encounter.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Right. So we have this fascinating parallel, right,
Yeah.
between Nidaga's journey and King Savira's journey.
Right.
They're both being challenged to move beyond their limited perceptions and embrace this more expansive view of reality.
And remember, this whole story is embedded within this conversation with the sage and the king.
Yeah.
So how does the king react to this tale of Ribhu and Nidaga? Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
This story with Ribhu and Nidaga, it's really stuck with me.
Yeah, it really is one of those, classic parables.
Yeah.
That just highlights how we can get so caught up in our heads that we miss the truth that's, right there in front of us.
Yeah, and remember, this whole story's part of this teaching that the sage is giving to King Savira.
Yeah.
So how does the king react to this tale? Does it finally click for him?
It does. The text tells us that this story has a profound impact on the king. It's like a light bulb goes off for him.
Okay.
And he starts to see the futility of chasing after these external things, right? As the source of true happiness.
Because they're ultimately unsatisfying.
Exactly. They're temporary. They're like those, skin and bones that Ribhu was talking about. And the king, he begins to understand that the happiness that he's been seeking all along, it's always resided within him.
Okay.
Within that Atman, that true self.
So he's grasping this this idea of non-duality,
Yes,
the
yes.
interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. And it's not just an intellectual understanding,
Right.
it's this deep intuitive knowing. And it really transforms his entire worldview.
Okay.
The king, he abandons his old way of thinking.
Yeah.
He lets go of his attachment to, worldly possessions, to status, to all of that.
That's pretty radical for a king,
Yeah.
You think about someone who has access to all the wealth and power anyone could want.
Yeah. Yeah, it really speaks to the transformative power of this teaching, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding a concept. It's about embodying a new way of being in the world.
So what happens to the king after this?
Yeah.
Does he like abdicate the throne? Does he go live in a cave?
Well, not quite. The text tells us that both the sage and King Sovira, they achieve liberation, moksha, in that very lifetime.
Okay.
And, in the Hindu context, liberation means, breaking free from this cycle of birth and death,
Okay.
realizing the ultimate truth of one's being.
So it's like this story is saying that this understanding of non-duality it's not just a nice philosophical idea.
Right.
It's a path to true freedom.
Exactly, exactly. But here's the thing, this idea of liberation, it's not just reserved for, ancient kings and sages. It's something that's available to all of us.
Okay, so how do we connect with this? We're sitting here in the modern world. We're not exactly living in ancient India, surrounded by gurus and ashrams.
Right, right. But the essence of these teachings, they're timeless.
Sure.
It's about recognizing that true self, it exists within each of us.
Okay, but how do we actually integrate that understanding? It's easy to get caught up in the sort of the intellectual fascination of all these ideas.
Yeah.
But how do we bridge the gap between theory and practice?
Well, it's not about, becoming a monk or renouncing the world. It's about bringing this awareness into our everyday interactions.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that interconnectedness in every encounter, in every relationship, and in every aspect of our lives.
So, if we're all ultimately connected, how does that change how we approach conflict, for example?
Well, instead of seeing disagreements as battles to be won or lost, we might approach them with more understanding, with more compassion. We might be more willing to listen to different perspectives,
Right.
to find common ground.
Because we're not seeing the other person as separate from us,
Exactly.
as the enemy.
Right, yeah.
But as a reflection of that same universal consciousness.
Exactly, exactly. And this shift in perspective, it can have a ripple effect on all aspects of our lives.
Yeah.
How we treat others, how we make decisions, how we relate to the environment.
Right.
It's about cultivating a sense of responsibility for the well-being of the whole.
Right.
Not just our individual selves.
Like we're expanding our circle of compassion
Precisely.
to include all beings.
Yes, and this isn't just some, pie in the sky ideal.
Right.
It's something that we can actually cultivate through, mindfulness, through meditation, through simply paying attention to how we interact with the world around us.
This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey.
It has.
We've explored ancient scriptures, grappled with some pretty profound philosophical concepts,
Yeah.
and I think uncovered some really, really practical insights. What's the one key takeaway that you hope our listeners walk away with?
I think the most important message here is that this idea of oneness,
Yeah.
of non-duality, it's not just a theoretical concept, it's a living truth.
Yeah.
And it has the power to transform our lives, our relationships, our world. And it's really an invitation to see ourselves and everything around us with new eyes,
Yeah.
with a sense of wonder, a sense of connection that transcends our perceived differences.
That's definitely something worth reflecting on.
It is. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Vishnu Purana, we invite you to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep into the mysteries of your own being.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.